it's Joe West from the West Bar with
Mike Shimshack.
Today we have four-time Grammy winner Chuck Ainlay. He's a Nashville royalty. Me and Mike were talking about this earlier. He's one of the guys in Nashville that is in that other league, at least in our perception. It's like you've got these guys that are just great engineers in town, and then you've got this like Elliot Scheider and Frank Filippetti, these guys that are just the next level up, legendary guys, at least in our minds. And he's one of those guys. He's a Nashville legend, originally born in Indiana, made his way to Nashville. He is Music Row magazine awarded him the most top 10 hits as an engineer. Mix Magazine's nominated him multiple times for Tech Awards. As we said, the Grammys, he's credited as the first digital recording out of Nashville. He's a huge 5.1 surround advocate and has done a lot of Grammy Award-winning records that have been 5-1 for Dire Straits, and on and on and on. Some of his credits include Vince Gill, Dire Straits, George Strait, Dixie Chicks, Miranda Lambert, Peter Frampton, Bob Seger, Lionel Richie, Elvis, Emmylou Harris, and much, much more. Welcome to the show, Chuck Ainlay.
Hey, how's it all going, everybody?
Thanks for being with us. Frank Filippetti had put us in contact. We want to thank him for that. And how does it feel to be a legend? Just kidding.
Oh, really? Come on. I love the introduction. It made my head just swell. But particularly here in Nashville, which is interesting, we're all just pals and we all get along and we go out and have dinner together. And, if somebody's got an idea, we share. That's what's so great about Nashville. It's not one of those communities where, hey man, I'm going to hold on to my secrets and I'm better than you kind of thing. We're all.
That's true.
I think maybe early on in my career, I thought of, I was going to be the best engineer, that was my goal. I'm going to be the best, but it didn't take me long to figure out there isn't such a thing. There's just different colors, shades, whatever of engineering. And, I'm just fortunate that I've gotten to work with all these amazing artists through my career and just a really wide variety of music styles too, which is, for me, that's perfect because I listen to everything. It's not like I am a country listener or a rock listener or a hip hop. I listen to everything, classical, whatever.
I was listening to an interview with you today from Gear Fest. And I was taken by what I assume is a necessary part of the DNA of a great engineer and producer. I'd say mostly the engineer portion of this. When you were talking about coming up and going to school and then like leaving school and then going to Belmont, and then Belmont had this little ganky studio that over your tenure there, it became an actual studio with an MCI console and 16-track recorder and some iso booths. But you said your studies were suffering because you were in the studio all the time. Yeah. It was like I had that as a young engineer where you just were like, well, there's no sense of me going home. I'm just going to sleep on the couch. You would end up being at the studio for days on end. And it was kind of like, I've noticed with the great engineers that really love the craft of it, that they'd rather be there than be somewhere else. And then when they're not there, they're kind of being magnetically drawn to the studio. And it sounds like you were in that Belmont studio kind of more so than you were at the school when you attended. It was like,
yeah, unfortunately for my grades, that's true. But it was my lifelong passion. Ever since a small child, I had an uncle, and we grew up in very rural sort of Indiana, up in farm country, northern Indiana. And but he had built a studio in his house. He'd record like sort of, the churches would come by and make their record, or whatever. But he had an actual like studio and control room. And he only had like 3 microphones, a little 4-channel mixer. But, I just kind of grew up around it, not in the professional sense like Elliot did or some of the other guys, Al Schmidt, where they kind of were brought into the business in a big way. I mean, I bought myself a 2-track recorder and like tried to record everything I could record. But I just, it's what I wanted to do. I remember going to a high school guidance counselor and saying, I want to be a recording engineer, because I'd seen it on the back of the album covers. And they go, what? I have
Yeah,
no
what
idea.
is that?
You know, what is that? So forget it, kid. Why don't you go get a real job? You know. So, and
Well,
speaking of,
and you said you were from Goshen, Indiana, yes?
yes, yeah,
Okay.
my uncle lived in Mishawaka, which was about half an hour away. So,
Well, Mike and I both grew up in the Rust Belt. He's from Buffalo, right?
Rochester, New York.
Rochester, right? I know I had that wrong. And I'm from Pittsburgh, and the expectation very much was like, what are you doing? You get out of high school and then you go work at Jones and Laughlin Steel, right?
right.
Or you go and you try to get a job at the post office. And are you insane? You're going to leave town, like that. It's not really on the smorgasbord of ideas whenever you're growing up in these little podunk towns or these small off the grid or the industry towns. It's just not expected. So when you go to your high school guidance counselor, they're kind of like, they don't know how to deal with you, but I think that we're pre-wired to do this. When you talk about, it's not an accident that you're a great engineer. It's a consequence of you being in the studio nonstop. I tell people all the time that we've been tying our shoes since we're 5 years old. I have a school called Apprentice Academy. And I tell those guys, no one's going to tell you that you're tying your shoes wrong. You are a master at tying your shoes because you've been doing it since you were 5 years old. People can tell you, you can laugh at them because it's a consequence of tying your shoes every day that you become a master at tying your shoes. And I think it is like this, it gets you above the ego where you have to feel guilty about being great at something. It's like your consequence for spending all day in the studio and being at the studio nonstop and letting your grades suffer. Your consequence is that you're a great engineer. And it's just the way it is. And that needs to be, I'm wondering, like when guys say, hey, I want to be an audio engineer now, I'm wondering if they don't have that, I don't know that they're going to be able to be a Chuck Ainlay, right?
Well, there's not a lot of opportunities for somebody to get to do what I got to do anymore. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities to make records that anybody can do it in their bedroom. I mean, with the equipment now, and you can make high quality recordings if you know how, in your bedroom. But to get to hang out in the studio, like the professional studio with the big analog consoles and all the gear and the microphones, and put a group of musicians in the room and record this cumulative thing where everybody contributes, everybody's a part of making the record. That, to me, that's what I wanted to do as a kid. It wasn't about sitting in my bedroom and making a record by myself. It was about hanging out with cool people that these musicians and producers and artists, these people that I saw on the back of the covers and read about in books and everything. I mean, it was like, that's what I want to do, and so, I mean, I love it. I still get to do that. We're going into the studio this weekend, and I'm tracking some stuff with Ann Wilson. This will be our second go around. Ann Wilson from Heart. And it's a blast. I mean, it's, for me, it's great because she's the real deal. She's really rock and roll, I mean, she lets it happen, and she sings it. She's full on that, and so it's like, man, it's it's part of my DNA too. And I want to do that. And so, yeah, I mean, that's the cool thing. But getting back to like doing it over and over and over again, I mean, that's what I always tell people. I never really had any great talent. I always, in the bands in high school, I mean, I was the one who couldn't get a guitar sound, I mean, it's like,
that's funny.
So it really has just taken years of training my ears to know what I'm looking for so that I can get there pretty quickly, and years of knowing what knob to turn and how far to turn it. And when you're pushing the gear too hard, except for this mic. I'm sorry, I was a little distorted to begin with, but but yeah, it's all that stuff. That's all part of the art. I was talking to a friend yesterday, actually, and we were talking about how quality is really sucking right now, and he said, yeah, he remembered being at an AES convention, and the keynote speaker was up there, a really famous engineer, talking about the fact that just because you can hit record doesn't mean you should hit record. That there are people that spend their lives, dedicate their lives to making great music, and that it is an art form. It is something that if it's done really right, it absorbs you into that piece. I mean, there's such a thing as a great song, and it doesn't really matter what it sounds like. That song is gonna penetrate the airwaves. It can suck for sound, but the stuff that absorbs you and holds you and makes you want to hear it again and again and again, and makes you want to hear it 10 years from now, maybe 20 years from now, that's what I'm talking about.
And if you take that song that's magical and you put sonics around it that are magical, it's then a whole different level. So let's not pretend that the great song that sounds shitty is acceptable. Imagine if it had sounded incredible and was emotionally moving. Then it's just like you've missed an opportunity there.
Then it's Dark Side of the Moon, man.
Right. Dude, have you been a part of any records that you would say feel like that? Like there's records I listened to, like Hourglass. We had Frank on last week, and we had we're talking deep dive into Hourglass, the James Taylor record. When I heard that record, it was like I didn't understand it. I was a little angry. Like as an engineer, I was angry. I remember getting the Sean Colvin record. My roommate in New York City worked for Sony Epic, and he had an advanced copy of Sean Colvin, a few small repairs, and it didn't have any labeling on it. It was just a CDR, and I listened to it, and I was furious. I was just mad because I couldn't do it. And then I found out Bob Clearmountain did it, and I felt a little better. But, have you been a part of a record that when it's all said and done, you go back to it, and you're like, wow, man, that might be like my Dark Side of the Moon?
It's so hard to be objective like that. I've had people tell me that records that I've done really affected their lives. And, there's only a few albums that I would classify Dark Side of the Moon. Right. So, I can't say that I've done that. But like an early record that I wouldn't personally say was sonically something that was great, but it was the first Steve Earle album. But it changed sort of country music. It changed the people who wanted to come to Nashville and make music, because it had so much attitude and everything. I did a Lyle Lovett record, large band album, that people have told me that. They've just told me that, man, that album, I still put that on to tune my mom, when they're doing a live show, that they put that album on to see what their speakers are sounding like. There's, I get people telling me like the Mark Knopfler records that I've done are just like sort of what they use to kind of judge everything by, because they're just warm and big and, in the country world, I think like a couple of the Miranda Lambert records that I made, there was the first couple of Taylor Swift records kind of really made a big dent in what people and how they perceived country music. So there's George Strait, but for me, it's always like kind of the latest thing that I've done almost is my favorite thing. Like this Ann Wilson project is just killing it. It's like,
I know what you're saying. I think that we're incapable of listening to something we've created, whether you've written it, produced it, mixed it, recorded it. It's very tough, but there are those moments, and maybe you've had one of these, where you're driving in a car. For me, it's when I'm driving to Pittsburgh to see my family on a holiday, we'll say. I'll be somewhere in the middle of Ohio, and on the radio will pop a song that I've either written, produced, or mixed, and I won't know that it's mine for 3.5 minutes.
Right. You go, wow, that's pretty good. What is that? I've heard that. Somehow you remember it in a way, but you don't remember it's you, right?
And then you're like, what is this? I really like it. Then you're washed with that warm glow that it's like, hey, I got to listen as a complete stranger for 3.5 measures to my song, and I didn't hate it, because I've done this thing where I've finished a record and I hear every porcupine tip on it. Everything I hate about the record. And then I listened a year later. I'm like, what was I even thinking about? I don't remember any of those things that were bothering me. Even at the end of a mix day, I'm always blown away. I'll feel a little bit demoralized at the end of a hard working mix day where you've really done your calisthenics that day. But I'm always blown away the next morning when I come in and hit the space bar and listen. I'm always like, that's nowhere near as bad as I felt like it was yesterday at 10 o'clock at night. You know?
And then that is something that with experience and time and doing it, you learn to kind of you learn when it's affecting you here and not here. And that's the hardest thing probably. I get asked that question often, is like, how do you know when to let go of a mix, or how do you know when to like say, okay, that guitar solo is a great guitar solo and you don't need to do another one, or that's a great take. And those are things that you learn from years of like going too far, trying too hard, and realizing that what a waste of time that it's when it hits you here and then you go, oh, okay. Or you get the chill bumps and you go, oh, okay. Yeah. All right. Now I know when I can let it go, and it doesn't have to be, I mean, actually those records that are all so like perfect are the ones that are so damn boring, I mean, it's the warts are what make them great and listenable to, like 10 years from now.
Yeah. How do you know when it's done? What is your bar of being done when a song is done? A mix is done?
It is that. It's like, okay, is this like affecting me emotionally? And that's, that's it.
There's an art to switching between like, hey, I'm going to work on 430 hertz in the kick drum, getting it out of there, or 280 hertz. I'm going to work on that. And you're like, you've got your lab coat on and you're doing the audio engineering things that are in the old Beatles books where they're wearing the white lab coats. Yeah. And then there's a version where as you get older, you have to learn it, where you switch from that into listening like somebody's mother. It's like, How do I now hit the space bar and zoom out from that? And how do I listen like I'm a 13-year-old with headphones on, listening to vinyl for the first time? How do I get a good first listen? That's an art that you probably get better at 30 years in. You just don't know when is too far when you're learning and coming up as a new engineer.
Totally. I mean, I think it's really important to get up and get away from it and take little breaks, work. If you are working technically on like kind of like you got to tune a vocal, or you've got to like you say, get all inside a bass drum or something, or there's a point to where you do that, but you got to get up and get away from it, and don't just keep laboring over it because you'll just go nowhere. Yeah. And that's one of the cool things about this sort of period that we've just gone through with, obviously we're not in the studios so much. I'm working from home primarily, really, other than the tracking sort of stuff. And so you can, I'll get up and I'll go play with the dogs, or go clean the leaves out of the pool, or go for a walk, or, make my wife a cup of tea, or, something like that. And then I come back and listen to it. The one thing that does suck is that, to get that fresh sort of viewpoint is always great when in the studio, your buddy down the hall that was working in studio B or D or whatever would walk in and go, "Hey man, what are you doing?" And I go, "Hey, check it out," and you play a little bit of it, and you sit back in the back of the room while they're up there in front of the speakers listening, and all of a sudden you like kind of, oh man, I hear it completely fresh now. Or the producer or the artist come in, and you set them down and you play it for them, and you hear the things that you were missing, and you don't get that viewpoint so easily at home unless you just kind of get up and walk away from it.
Well, and you don't feel comfortable doing it when you've got Emmylou Harris sitting on the couch behind you. You're like, hey, I'm just going to go out and play with my dogs by the pool for 25 minutes or so, and then I'll be back and I'll be fresh. Like that, you can't do that when you're in Ocean Way. It wouldn't be prudent when you've got like a client there or a producer. You feel obligated to be working, so you don't get the fresh perspective. I think people really need to let, especially their mix engineers, it's like, let them do it. And then the best gift is to give somebody a reference and then say, don't listen on my monitors in my barn. You don't know. Go listen in your car that you listen to every record on. Listen on your stereo, your iPod,
Yeah.
on your earbuds. Listen all the places you know, and then say, hey, this is what on my 5 reference points, this is what I think about the record. And give your engineer the freedom to really have the relationship with the mix that he needs to have to get it done. That's the best gift you can give
I
someone.
always tell them to, don't come around until I'm kind of, what I want when I do a mix is I want to get it to where I'm happy with it. And I want that opinion. I want somebody to come in and hear it. It helps me at that point too, to kind of have a fresh look at it. And then I'll adjust it in every which way you want. I'll start over if you don't like what I did, but that's generally not the case. I mean, generally people come in and they have a small little tweak, or maybe they want to hear the vocal a little drier, or they want to hear an effect, a delay effect or something. And, so it's minimal stuff usually when they come in, if I've had the chance to just, jump in and like figure out what makes that song work. The worst thing that can happen is somebody tell you, well, make sure that the guitar part's, loud, or, I want to hear my vocal really, whatever. The worst thing is that, because you can't ever get past that, as you keep second judging what's going on there. So it's best to like go, here, check out, I want you to mix this song because I like your work. Boom. And let me do it.
Right. I just mixed a record for someone, and they sent it off to a noted mastering engineer. And when we got it back, it was just so directionally, it was so wrong that I said, just tell him thank you. Let's not make this guy who he isn't. It's like, it was so far off that I'm like, let's just say thank you, because he was asking for revisions, and I'm like, pay the guy, say thank you. And I would feel just fine as a mix engineer if I'm not the right person. It's like, go find the right person, because it will never be magic when it's not sort of in my wheelhouse. It's like, get Chuck Ainlay to give you a version, and then maybe he's way closer, and then there's magic there. I want that for every record. We're pleasers, I think, inherently. If you're working in a recording studio for 20 hours a day, you're a pleaser. You're not like a egomaniac, out to rule the world. You want people to be happy, and sometimes that's the beauty of music. It's like your fingerprint is indelibly put onto that record, whether you like it or not. Sometimes it's the right one, sometimes it's not. And that's okay. Learning that is okay. I wanted to ask you about your 30-year career with Mark Knopfler. I mean, all the way from the 5-1 mix that you did for Brothers in Arms that won the Grammy, 30 years with an artist. And when I looked at your discography, I mean, it was so long. It was like, I couldn't get past 2006. I just kept scrolling, and I was just like, I'm still in 2006. It's like, this guy, what is up with this guy? This guy's got a problem. He's too likable. It's like, that's another thing, that when you see a guy that is able to work for 30 years with a very demanding artist, how does somebody work with an artist that long? What is it about you think that allows that? Because we all want that. Why not turn the records you have into more records and then get new records, rather than always doing a first record, not being asked back?
Well, gosh, I mean, part of being an engineer, being an engineer is only a small part being technically capable. Most of it is having like some musicality in you. And a whole lot of it is being very likable. So, I mean, I can be an asshole, believe me, but, and I used to say, I kind of mixed by intimidation. And there was a point in my life where I
have to explain that later.
Would come in and I go, what do you mean you don't like that? I mean, but that's not so much anymore. But no, I mean, you have to be likable. I mean, make sure you put on your deodorant in the morning, take a shower. Those sort of hygiene things are important in the studio, because you're sitting next to somebody all day long, brush your teeth, floss your teeth, those things are like kind of important. Mark, I don't know. I mean, that again, how you get gigs, people say, well, how'd you get that gig? Well, that's actually came from a close relationship with a musician, Paul Franklin, who's undoubtedly the best steel guitar player in the world. And Mark had worked with Paul when he was doing a Chet Atkins duet album called Neck to Neck. And so Dire Straits had actually broken up after Brothers in Arms, that album. But the guys needed, to get back at this. Some of them had some drinking problems, some this and money problems, this and that and the other. And so Mark said, okay, we'll put the band back together and do one last tour, but Paul Franklin's going to be in the band. So they went into the studio with Bill Schnee and Jeff Beccaro to start recording this next album. And a few days into it, Bill kind of couldn't commit to the whole album. And so Mark wanted somebody that would like kind of be there and take it all the way through. So they were having lunch at Air Studios in London, and Mark asked Paul, who's great in Nashville? And Paul said, well, you should get Chuck. So I got this call just out of the clear blue. And it was Mark's manager with this really heavy accent saying, and at the time, they were the biggest band in the world. They'd sold more albums, had the biggest tour of anybody. I mean, they were the biggest band in the world. And they go, hey, we want you to come record Dire Straits. And I was like, oh, right. You got to call me tomorrow. I'm too busy. And hung up the phone. I get home and my wife goes, did Dire Straits management call you? And I said, oh, shit. And but fortunately, they called back the next day. I flew over to England, and Paul was not on those next sessions that I was. So I was like me and Dire Straits, and it was like, wow. And I had to, like, the drummer Jeff had gone home, and they were using their drummer from the previous tour, and he hadn't played since they had finished the tour, and it was rough. It was like, here the band was they had been playing with Jeff Beccaro and felt like they were a super group, and then their egos had been crushed because they were not rocking. And I was sitting there going, God, this isn't happening. And the manager's going, man, you got to get on the talk back and tell them this isn't happening. So, I mean, for 5 days, I was like, this is not happening, guys. And we'd go to the pub and talk about it and come back and try something else. And I figured it that weekend that for sure I was going home. And so we took the weekend off. That Monday I came in and they'd fired the drummer. So, well, we're just going to work on this and then we'll like cut with somebody else. And so anyhow, that was my beginning of a relationship with Mark. And it was like many nights of hanging out at the pub and talking about how I would make a record if we were to do a solo album. And when Mark decided to do his first solo album, he called me up. I wasn't expecting it, really. He called me up and said, man, I want I want to start making my album. And that's the way it was. We'd finish an album. I would think I would not hear from him again, and we'd do another album. I think we did 8 of them or something, eight solo albums, several movies. I learned so much from him about making great music and not like trying to follow trends, because he never did. He never followed trends. I mean, all of his hits were kind of like not what was going on the radio at the time. It was something brand new, and that's really important. I mean, especially here in Nashville, we're like a factory at times. It's just like cranking it out, and the songwriters are all chasing that latest hit. The musicians are all chasing that latest hit. The guys behind the controls are all trying to get that latest sound, and it's like, that's not it. That's not how you make a great record. It's about like,
it's how you keep your job. It's not how you forge a new genre.
Yeah.
I thought one thing I just took away from that conversation there that was maybe unintended was you had been auditioning with Paul Franklin unknowingly. I mean, look what that turned into. You better give him great end of year Christmas gifts. I mean,
hey, if there's one thing I can tell an engineer is be kind to your musicians. because they're the ones that get you the gigs.
Yeah.
They're the ones that tell, they're on another session and they're like going, hey man, I was doing a record with Chuck and he got this most killer drum sound, or this, blah blah blah. I mean, those are the guys, man. And they talk about you. They are talking about they're talking about each other too. The ones that are really great and they want to hang with and make them sound good and all that. That's the ones that they want to have in the studio with them.
That's the secret weapon. Be great all the time, because you might have been on some $200 for the session union rate demo with Paul Franklin. Not that he's doing a ton of demos, but everybody's doing demos in town, And now it turns into a 30-year career with Mark Knopfler. I mean, be great all the time, and I mean, you're always auditioning for something.
Well, and every record that you're on, doesn't matter what it is. Yeah, be great all the time, because I mean, that's the way I always felt, is like, no matter what this is, even if I don't like it, I'm going to learn something from it, and I learn from every recording I've ever made. Sometimes I forget it, but
well, you do
hopefully come back around.
If it comes back around, it might be important to remember. I would assume, and I know you're probably not doing a ton of demos, but if you got Chuck Ainlay to record your demo session, he's going to record you as full bore, as hard as he can, just like he's doing a Mark Knopfler record. He's not going to give you a demo rate talent. He's not going to be like, oh, I'm going to scale myself down. Not that you do demos, but if you were on a demo session, I know you would commit to making the record that was in the room, the best record that's in there.
Absolutely. I mean, even if I'm not getting paid for it, I'm going to go in there and, and I do that sometimes, I mean, there's a friend who's like, hey man, I'm going to go in. Can you just come in and get my drum sounds for me? And so, yeah, sure, I'll go do that,
That's awesome. I'm going to need to do that with you. Like, every time I get hired, I'll be like, hey, can you just come in and get and then I'll send you home. Hey, call you back. Can you just come in and get the bass sound? Hey, send you home. Hey, the guitar sound. Can you just come
it's one of those things. If you love doing it, you'll do it for nothing,
I had, I also watching that interview with, the Gear Fest one from Sweetwater. You were talking, and I don't think you intended this, but you had said like, yeah, and the latest, I don't know when that was shot. You said the latest Mark Knopfler record was done by the guy that does the programming. What was his name?
Oh yeah. Oh dang it.
Oh, sorry to put you on the spot.
Guy Fletcher. Sorry, I'm sorry. I blanked for a second. So, Guy's amazing. He actually started out as an engineer, and his dad is Ted Fletcher. I don't know if you
Joe Meek.
Joe Meek, yeah. So that's Guy's dad. I remember reading years ago when I was that Ted had designed the first sort of digitally controlled analog desk called Alice. So I mean, that's the lineage that Guy comes from, and he had worked at CTS and some of these other studios, but he's just one of these really gifted people, can do anything really. He's a great guitar player, singer, bass player, engineer, keyboard player. He got the gig with Dire Straits by turning up at Mark Knopfler's house with a DX7 under his arm and said that he wanted to play keyboards for Dire Straits, and Mark kind of like, well, come on in, let's see what you got, and they kind of jammed a little bit, and Mark would play something in D and Guy would go and do the transpose mode, so he was always playing in C.
My kind of keyboard player,
right? So he would change keys, play in C, and so Mark said, you know what, you've got talent, but if you're going to play, you have to learn all the keys. And so he did. And now, I mean, so at any rate, we kind of would do these sessions. It all started out initially, Mark would come to Nashville, track in Nashville, and then we would go to, he had, well, they call it a muse. It's basically the alleyway between the mansion houses, and the house behind the mansion was the stable where they'd keep the carriage and the horse, and the people that looked after it would live above. Well, anyhow, these become very valuable in Holland Park, and Mark had one on either side of the muse. So the one I would stay in and walk across the muse to the other one, and we'd work all day long. And then Yeah, blah, blah, blah. So we do all the overdubs and comping and tuning and whatnot in there, and then we go to air and mix it. And you know, as we would do these albums, I remember sitting at the dinner table. George Martin owned Air Studio, of course, right? So George would sit with us at lunch almost every day. And I remember Mark going, well, I want to build my own studio. I said, I could own a yacht. I've got enough money. I could like float around in the Caribbean or the whatever and have this beautiful yacht. But that's not what I want to do. I want to be in the studio all day long. So we started writing down on a napkin. He still has it, like all the things that we hated about some of the studios we'd been in, all the things that we loved about some of the studios. Meanwhile, George is sitting there talking about the fact that he has this old demo of John Lennon's, and he's got this idea of taking the demo and getting all the Beatles to play on it and releasing it as a singles, which he did. It was like the last Beatles single. And I remember George so clearly talking about using all this new technology and everything to make that record. It was so cool. It was like one of those moments that you'll never forget. And in the end, basically that napkin is what started British Grove, which Mark's studio in London, which is probably one of the world's greatest studios for sure. It's amazing. Wow. Yeah.
So he was, what I took from that conversation was like, you had done a bunch of Mark Knopfler records. And I think this is a telltale sign of a true person comfortable in their creative prowess and just being a great engineer. And was that you said, oh, he went on to make this record with dude. I forget his name.
Oh, yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Guy.
With Guy. I'm so sorry, Guy. But you could tell that you were fine with it. Some people would feel like, hey, that's my girlfriend now. I've been working with them for 8 records. That's my turf. Don't take my record. But I could tell that you were totally okay with it. And I've found, like, in my own career, if you get to be okay with that, it always comes back around. You'll mix that record. You'll get on the next record. It's like the second you expect something in this world, people will make sure you don't get it again. And I thought, like, man, that's such a mature thing. And I know you weren't even intending to do that, but it just had you had this air about you that you were just like, it was a great record. And, he went on and made this record. And I just thought, man, that's a real class act, but also self-preserving in the fact that you'll be on other records. You will get back creatively in that situation because of that attitude.
Well, and it's kind of what goes around comes around too. I mean, it's like I was an engineer on George Strait's records for so many years. Just, I was just the engineer, whatever. And one day George called me up and he said, hey, I'm thinking about making a change. Would you produce my next album? And I'm like, man, I mean, Tony Brown, man, who produced George. I said, man, I've had this huge long career with him as an engineer, and really he's the one who kind of gave me all these great records to do that have made my name. I said, that's a hard thing. He said, well, I mean, there was just certain things he said, and he felt like he was ready to make a change. Would I do it? I said, well, I'm not going to say no, but Tony was like cool with it, man. I mean, he's like, it happens, man. It's just like, the artist feels as though they just need something different. And it's that happens.
So in that scenario, do you go and talk to Tony? Do you like?
Oh yeah, we hang out, man. I have him over.
Did you talk to him and say, listen, this is what was proposed to me. How do you feel about this? Did you do that, or did you just take the gig on the spot, or how'd that work?
We had a conversation. In fact, I think maybe even because George is not the most confrontational person, and his manager was almost kind of out of the picture at the time, and so yeah, I mean, I had to talk to Tony and say, how this doesn't go wrong, but I mean, I couldn't say no to George, and this is a great opportunity for me. And he's like, man, he said, I would have told George if I wasn't going to do the next record that you should do it anyhow.
That's cool.
So, I mean, yeah, we're, I mean, he still hires me to mix records for him and track records for him. And I mean, we've we've made some great records since then, and you know, it's just how things are, though. I mean, I think you can't.
Right.
Creativity can't be held to a contract.
You're so right.
You know what I'm saying? It has to be about these people gonna like get together and do what's best for the song and the music, and that, so it, you know, it just can't be held to a contract.
There is I learned this growing up in my little world there. You know, I had a anger problem that I didn't realize. I didn't even know it because I was just in my little bubble. In a secretary at a recording studio, I made her cry because she was like, "Hey, you know, you got." I was like, "What?" And I didn't even know that I was doing that. Right? There's this thing where you're just unaware that what you're doing has consequences. I made a decision to not be that guy.
Yeah.
And I tried to. And I have actually said to her, I said, "Hey, when you see me do that," and I tell my wife and son this too. I said, I'm not self-aware. When you see me do it, point it out so I can be in the middle of it. And I can, it's not fun. It's not comfortable, by the way, but you can recognize it. I'm saying all this to say we have a obligation as we get older to look at things and make a decision. Am I going to be happy for my friend that gets a number one whenever I am so close to success? The arrows are landing all around me. I had to make a decision to be happy for my friends. And then I truly embraced it. And now it's my favorite thing when my friends have success. When somebody doesn't want me to produce a record, I got onto an Emmylou Harris record that was nominated for a Grammy with Dan Lanwall and Malcolm Byrne. Stumble into Grace. It's why I moved to Nashville. And that record came about because the artist decided that I'd done a bunch of records with, decided that he was going to use Malcolm Byrne to produce his next record. And I was like, hey, man, that's awesome. And I lent him my V72s and a U47 that sounded great on him. I let him take those up to Kingston, New York, and make the record. Turns out that they didn't like the record, and they asked me to mix the record, and they loved the record. Malcolm asked me to do a Rachel Yamagata record and a Sparkle Horse record, and then the Emmylou Harris record. All that happened because I made a decision not to do what my body was like. Hey, I'm going to be mad. I'm Tony Brown. I'm going to be mad that George Strait is now moving on. You know, I made a decision, and it ended up moving me to Nashville with a career that, you know, has been a pretty good career that maybe I would have not had. I think it's important as we get older to make decisions to not control things that are uncontrollable. When you're on the outs, you wish the people well. You wish that their record turns out great. You become a resource. And if it's meant that you come back into the fray, that's great. But it's not a natural thing. It's a learned behavior. It's something that I could say, you know, we talk about a little bit about the technology. We do deep dives on, we just had on Mike Fraser, who's done 8 AC/DC records. And we went through like, hey, take us from kick drum Mike to Mike Pre to panning. We went through the whole deal. The technology is super important. And a lot of people listen to this podcast that maybe things fly over their head. But you said it earlier, which you said engineering is this much of it. People will let that fly over their head. But the reality at the end of the day is how you deal with politics in the room, what your true heart is for the outcome of a record, how you want people to do well. If you participate in that and you make yourself invaluable in the room, that is way more a litmus test of the successful people that we've talked to. Those are the people that succeed. Even if selfishly you want to do it, but learn to embrace it and really enjoy it, that part of it, like someone has a number one, you're legitimately overwhelmingly happy for them. That's the real secret to making it, to being a Chuck Ainlay 30 years later. Because if you had been an asshole in all those decisions, you would have burned these bridges. You would have never got referred to be in the room with Mark Knopfler. It's just a decision to do that. I guarantee you, if you're listening to this podcast and you're just learning how to EQ something, take that to heart just as much as how hard you're going to work on compressors and EQs. And you'll look back 20 years later and you'll be on a podcast like this, telling people about your life. I truly believe that's the biggest secret to being successful in the music business.
For sure. Echo that.
Yeah. Well, dude, thank you so much for being on this podcast. It's
so
cool to have you on.
It's been a blast. I mean, yeah, man. I didn't even have to talk about 10K or anything like that.
You know, we should have you back on and dig a little bit deeper into 5.1. 5.1 is just sort of this lost art that I don't know how much of it's living in the world today. You know, it seems like it maybe other than movie theaters, you know.
Well, actually 5.1 is now what they call immersive, which is there's Dolby Atmos and the Sony 360 and the Auro are kind of the three major sort of immersive technologies or ideals. Dolby and Universal Warner's have been throwing a lot of money at remixing catalogs in immersive, and Sony is redoing their whole catalog in immersive. And essentially what immersive is the speaker array can vary. With Dolby Atmos, it's all scalable so that in a theater you could have 11 speakers down the side and across the ceiling, or in a environment like my room here, you could have like 11 ones. So you'd have a 5-1 setup, and possibly sides with a quad overhead and a sub. So that would be sort of like probably the most minimal. The most minimal would be not to have the sides. So it'd be 5-1 plus quad overhead and sub. And that's essentially what the Sony 360 is. The Sony 360 can only be heard on headphones or on one of these sound bars that do immersive. Whereas the Atmos can be played back on speakers. So and headphones. Auro is a speaker playback. They have a headphone technology as well. And that is like full scale. I mean, I've not done any. I was just recently contacted about doing a compilation album of Dire Straits. And so I'm looking forward to doing it. Unfortunately, most of it's being done kind of like on the cheap. The labels are only paying so much, and having assistant engineers like kind of just take stems and kind of pan the stems, around and put effects on it. It's just, to me, it's phony. It's terrible. Most of it that I've heard, there's some really great stuff where people have actually tried to recreate the mix, but do it in this new environment. And that's the way I looked at 5-1 is like, hey man, I've got a new palette to paint on, and the all the rules that you kind of had to live by in stereo are kind of out the window. You can do things fresh, and it was really really invigorating, and really I was really into it. But unfortunately, the consumer didn't adapt to it because there was so many different technologies, and nobody was going to put all these speakers in their house. Now with this technology, you can basically, Amazon makes one of their Alexa little speakers. What is it? Not Alexa? What's
not Amazon.
It's the Amazon little Echo.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But they got the Echo Pro or whatever. That's a bigger thing that will do it. And then, there's these sound bars that will, and they basically give you this feeling of sound all around you. It's not anywhere near as good as like discrete speakers, and the headphones really lack in giving you the imaging out in front of you, but you get this space. It's a new way of listening, and it's kind of entertaining.
So it works on discrete.
There's a lot of work coming down, and it may be that's the future. I don't know.
It works on discrete speakers as well as just two speakers can create it. Yes. The illusion of it. Oh wow.
Yeah, it's like binaural technology. You've heard binaural mixes where they used microphones in a dummy head, and then you put on headphones and you can hear somebody walk around you, right? It's that sort of technology. But they computerize the idea of the phase shift that happens, and timing shift that happens, that make your ears believe that something's behind you or something's in front of you or something's above you, and they apply that like to your discrete mix. So you have a discrete mix, and then they use that, they put it in a computer and render the binaural image, and so you can hear that thing in headphones. Different. I heard like years ago, I heard just a really, when we were all doing 5-1, I heard a super convincing version of it. But there was two guys that I can't remember their names, but they had figured it out. And what they had to do, though, they had to test your ears first. They would test the depth of your ears and run some voodoo, and the computer would figure out your ears, and then you put on the headphones that this was all designed to work with, and it was great. I mean, you really heard. The only difference to me when I listened to that was sort of the bottom end difference of the headphones and the mains, and they had like an infrared sensor, so as soon as you took the headphones off, it would switch to speakers, so you could really compare. And so they're doing that same technology, but obviously they're trying to apply it to an average of ears and an average of headphones. And so it's not as convincing.
I always felt like it was like, okay, this works for two places. It works for theaters where, people are oriented towards a screen, or a home system, a home viewing system. Or it works in vehicles because, people are pointed in a direction, but
Right.
I always felt like, oh, this is just it's a flawed marketing, like trying to get a dominance in the marketing approach, because it's just when are you going to get somebody that is faced at X and pointing towards Y? But if you're saying the real trick would be for them to be able to get it to work in these little Amazon Echoes, in the Alexas and little Bluetooth speakers. Once they do that, then it can scale. It's just as for me, when I looked at it, it always seemed like it was a high degree of technical prowess that you needed to set up your surround sound system. I had like I'd go over my brother-in-law's place, and the back speakers would be, it'd just be a mess, So it was just not normal. People couldn't do it, but if they can get it done through a big box store,
it's happening now. It's a reality. My feeling, though, is that, unless it's great, unless it's like really done well, people are going to go, well, this is just a gimmick, Mm-hmm. And I mean, for the most part, I prefer listening to my two stereo speakers. I get a real 3D image out of these sitting in the right place. And it's like, man, I can hear depth so far back in there. And, for the most part, I prefer that. But if I've heard some that are really done well, and where people have taken the time and actually are trying to recreate a mix not from stems, from sort of discrete tracks, and really trying to create the feeling that they got from the stereo mix in this new environment. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what's going to happen. The problem is the labels are, at least at the moment, what they're trying to do is just have a degree of penetration in the market with enough material so that people go, okay, I can stream this instead of the stereo. So I mean, it's there,
and then have something to play it back on.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a Tidal account. You have to have the premium account, and that's the whole point for the labels, is that, okay, we can make people pay for the premium account so that they can get this.
Mm-hmm.
And if people start demanding to have that, they'll pay $20 instead of $10 a month,
right.
And I imagine some of the labels have it in mind that they're going to start their own streaming service rather than, Tidal or Spotify or, Amazon. So, all that, the politics aside, the music's what's important, and hopefully we don't lose the great mixes of the past. For me, that's my big worry. Although there has been sort of a, there's kind of like it's been said, no, we will not play this or the fold down of this instead of the stereo. If you're listening in stereo, you're going to hear the original stereo. So
gotcha.
My worry is that, they're only going to put up the new, immersive product and do a fold down for stereo, which would totally suck.
Meaning they'll stack them all on a left and right. Yeah.
Well, it would mean that you have this mix that some kid did, that has never got any.
Yeah,
like,
he's in a label in some back room on a set of headphones on a Mac
I
Pro.
mean, that's the sad fact of the matter, is that's what's happening. So.
Hey, before we let you go, will you tell us what this console is in front of you?
Oh, well, this is it's made by Yamaha. It's called Nuage. You can get more of these fader packages. I've seen a lot of film post places where they have a number of these, so different people can sit at a station. But it's 16 channels, and what's so cool about it is you can just scroll through all the channels. And if you'll notice, I mean, as I do that, the channel, sorry, I banged the mic. The channel stays with it. So it's like looking at a big desk, just like here, you know?
Right.
That's awesome.
And so you can scroll through. I mean, I've had the last song I was working on had like 150 tracks, and it's like not a problem. You know, if you had 150 tracks coming up on an analog console, you'd be so tired at the end of the day from sliding from one end of the console to the other, you know?
Right.
So you can sit here in the sweet spot. You know, it's got all the editing functions. You can have the knobs do anything. I mean, you know, you can fold out the entire plugin and adjust the plugin. I generally tend to use the trackball for like adjusting plugins, but to have my hands on faders and be able to tweak reverb sends and stuff like that.
It's a control surface, though, no audio through it, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's and I use Nuendo instead of Pro Tools. So I'm one of the oddball guys. And that goes way, way, way back to, actually, it goes back to the Dire Straits days when we had a Synclavier direct-to-disc system that we were doing. We had two Sony 48-track machines locked together, and then we used the Synclavier direct-to-disc system to do editing, and then we'd bounce back to the 48 tracks with the fixes. And then Pro Tools came along, but it wasn't called, it was like Audio Tools or so. I can't remember what it was
Sound
called.
Tools.
Sound, yeah. So
Sound Designer.
Sound is, well, I can't, yeah.
One of those.
We had that, and I mean, of course, it sucked for sound, but you could do things in it that you couldn't do previously, you know? So we would like kind of do things in that, fix it, and put it back into the 3348. And then Pro Tools got better, but it still pretty much sucked for sound. So again, you know, we were always just kind of like fixing things and putting it back into the 3348 and working off the 3348. Some people were abandoning tape at that point and were just going full hard disk. But I was like kind of a little more conscientious about the sonics of it, because their converters were terrible back then, and it was 16-bit, and the delay compensation, they didn't have any. What do you mean delay compensation? What's that? And it was 48-bit fixed, or 24-bit fixed, or maybe it was 48
on the mixer you're talking.
Yeah, the internal computer technology. Anyhow, Nuendo came along, and I got invited to be in this group of engineers to kind of like work with Steinberg and you know, kind of be the face of Nuendo Cubase. And so it was 32-bit floating point, and you could use any converter you wanted to. And so I got these like really great MyTech converters, and I mean, that system sounded great, but you had to work on a PC, and the PC sucked. So it was
right.
Know, it was a bottleneck there. Eventually, computer power now, you know, obviously you can, the way everybody's working now is like that, where it's basically all in the computer, and so now the technology is there that, yeah, and Pro Tools, you know, adopted the floating point architecture and everything. Their converters have gotten, in fact, their super high-end converters are like really awesome. Can't remember the name of the company that actually makes them, that Avid puts their faceplate on. brain dead. At any rate, but I just got started using Nuendo and I love it. So, I mean, there's things about Nuendo that I still prefer, comping on it. And so, and also the other thing, if nothing else, it's like sort of the do not get in my way dongle, because people don't know how to run it, so they can't just reach over your shoulder and go, oh, here, let's just do this. I mean, I watch these poor Pro Tools engineers, and like the guitar player comes in, goes, get out of the way, let me just do, and they start editing, and it's like, how
demoralizing that the guitar player jumps in and is like,
oh yeah, totally,
do it this way.
Yeah,
that's funny.
Yeah. So at any rate, I still love it, and I love this Surface. I don't think they sell many of them because there's not a lot of us, but it is an awesome Surface. So,
well, thank you for spending your morning with us. We appreciate you.
I hope you can edit out all that and make it work.
No, man, that's what's great about these. These are just conversations. It's like the idea is that you get to eavesdrop in on a table that's next to you with people that you really respect, and people. If they stick around for the full hour and 16 minutes, God bless them. If not, go watch something else.
All right.
You were fantastic. And thank you for coming on. You stellar dude. That's it for this week. Thank you for signing on. We'll see you next time from the West Bar.